A moment of significant change or a turning point, altering your course, is known as an inflection point. In business, these moments have a significant impact in many ways. That's why we're speaking with leaders from across the asset management industry to hear the stories of their inflection points and the impact they've had on their journeys. Join me and my colleague Mark Spina as we explore the business of being in business, with insights that can help you wherever you may find yourself. This is Inflection Points.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Inflection Points. I'm your host, Jillian DelSignore, and I am thrilled today to be joined by an old friend and industry colleague. That seems to be a theme in my interviews, Estee. I love to interview friends who I say on every episode, I learn something new no matter who I'm talking to and how long I've known them. So I'm looking forward to that with you. But I am thrilled today to be joined by Estee Faranda, who is currently the CEO of PFS Investments out of Atlanta, Georgia. And Estee and I got to know each other back during her times at InvestNet here in Chicago, which we'll talk a lot about over the course of our conversation. But let me, with no further ado, introduce Estee into the conversation.
Thanks, Jillian. I am so honored that you asked me to do this, and you set the bar high. Now I have to make sure you get.
That's right. I need a nugget. I need a nugget. I know I will. Without a doubt, I will. Because I feel like as much as we know each other, we've met. Although now that I think about it, it has been quite a while. I think with COVID, I still feel very warped in time. I think a lot of people feel that way.
How's that?
I can't believe how long it's been since you left Chicago. It feels like a minute ago that we were sitting having coffee, and it's been so many years, but I want to take us back. So I know you from your times in Chicago, but you're actually from New Jersey. I don't know where Union is. I don't know if it's anywhere near Bernardsville, New Jersey, where Flex is based, but no. Okay. So not at all near Bernardsville, but born and raised in Union, New Jersey. Maybe talk to us a little bit about what that was like growing up there, and where is it precisely for those who aren't familiar with New Jersey?
So it is a suburb of New York City. So it's North New York City. And everyone says New Jersey's two states, North Jersey and South Jersey.
Yes. So Jersey's very Philly, right?
It's very Philly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yes. And North Jersey's very New York. So I'm from that part of the state, born and raised. I even went to university there. It's almost quite literally in my backyard. I just had a very strict Italian immigrant father who just didn't want me far away. And I was not quite the person I am now. So I was definitely a little shy or a little more timid. And I followed along and ended up going to school in my backyard. Yeah. Wow. But I will tell you this. Although I did go to school in my backyard, I also come from, believe it or not, a Navy family. Oh. So what I did was also join the Navy Reserves right out of.
So there it is. We've already hit it. But I didn't know.
Yes. Now we can go now it's all downhill.
Wow. Wait, how did that even, obviously because you came from a Navy family, but was that the main driver?
It was part of the driver, and it was also to prove I was very bookish, very shy, very non-athletic, like extremely non-athletic. Okay. And I think I just wanted to prove to myself that I could make it through boot camp, let's say. But I also wanted to go to school. Active duty was not in the cards for me. So reserves were boot camp, training, and then 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year was more my speed.
Wow. How long did you do? Was it 5 years?
6 years.
6 years. Wow.
Yeah.
That is impressive. And all through the university.
Correct. Through university. And then even when I was working and I had actually moved to Chicago, I finished up my final 2 years, or maybe it was a year and a half in the Chicago burbs.
That's amazing. That's actually fascinating. It is, I think, probably, well, not that you sound like you had a fairly disciplined upbringing, but I think for a lot of people, it just inserts such discipline and structure to confidence. That's such a great.
That was the big one for me, just to first of all meet people that I would have never otherwise have met, and just to have the confidence that I can completely step out of my world and do a fine job. It meant a lot to me.
Wow. Do you still stay in touch with anybody that you met then?
I don't, and No one's ever asked me that before. I regret that. I wish I did. But they were all active duty.
Were they?
Everyone in boot camp and training was I was the only reservist. So it made it a little difficult.
I don't know if you've ever played the game Two Truths and a Lie, but there's your truth. Yeah. There's one of your truths.
Yeah.
That's a good one. That's a really good one. So during that upbringing, did your father, I also have an Italian father, not first generation, second generation, but I'm curious with that upbringing, was there anyone in your life that sort of stood out as helping drive you keen? What were the areas of study? Was there something that drove you that direction within university, or something that sort of that you think about as influential in your early, more formative years?
My father was a teacher,
Yep.
and my mother was a secretary.
Okay.
And so they didn't so much guide me as to what career path I should take. Rather, they guided me to be as practical as I could possibly be. So, I wanted to be an archaeologist, and they steered me away from that. So I studied business, and I fell into insurance. My first job was actually with a company called the New England. They were later acquired by MetLife, and I was working in a group employee benefits office.
Oh my goodness.
And I actually started while I was in school doing data entry, basic office work.
Yeah.
And I just kept getting promoted. And once I was done with school, they trained me. They put me in one of their training classes to be an enroller.
Okay.
So I would enroll folks in health and health plans, enroll employees in their group insurance plans and their 401k plans.
Wow.
So that's really how I started out in the business.
Isn't that so interesting? I talk to people all the time just about you guys. There's a little bit about mentorship, and I obviously really want your perspective on that. You don't have to, people think finance, investment management. There's so many parts of this business you can enter through, end up in. It's just so diverse.
It's so true. And a lot of people look from the outside, look at our industry and think Wall Street.
Yes.
And even what I do now, not to mention what I did before, it's as far away from Wall Street as you can get.
Totally.
So there's so many, you're right, you're spot on. But to actually answer your question, I had no mentor, right? I had no one really guiding me. And I don't even think internships were a thing back then. So I never know. I didn't even know what the possibilities were.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason, Jillian, I am so passionate about helping younger people now. I didn't have it. I got lucky, right? But there's something that's it's very satisfying to me to be able to help guide someone and let folks know what the possibilities are.
Yep, absolutely. If they can't see someone in it, like they can't see themselves in it. And I think about that so frequently around myself or helping others. I completely appreciate that. And I know you've been involved. You were a mentor in Women in ETF Chicago, weren't you? Yeah, I was. So it's definitely always been paying forward. From insurance to Morningstar, AVM Monroe. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
What was that pivot? What did that look like to you? You were still young in your career, I imagine.
I was. So I spent about 5 years total with the insurance company.
Okay.
And again, I was involved in group health and group 401k, group retirement plans. But I quickly realized that I liked the 401k side of the business a lot more.
Yeah.
And by this time I was in Chicago, and I knew I was ready for more.
Yep.
And I was in a branch office. So there was a very low ceiling.
Yeah.
And that is the theme in my career, and something that I make sure to tell people, that sometimes your next step is not with your current company.
Yep.
And that's okay, right? Sometimes we need to change jobs in order to seek out more challenges and be challenged and get ahead. So I left it was called Chicago Title and Trust at the time. I probably have 5 different business cards at this one company.
I think just the ones that were the title company on my most recent closing. My mortgage. I think I was at that office. That's so funny. Yes.
Funny, right on
God.
Clark Street. Yeah.
Yes. That's
Yeah.
100% where we were. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my, what were you doing there?
At that company, I was a relationship manager for large 401k plans.
Okay. Okay.
And it actually, Jillian, it was at that company that I got my first true management job.
Okay.
And my boss at the time, and one of the best managers I've ever had in my career, a lot of how I am is based on how this gentleman, Terry Zirkle, was.
Yeah.
And I remember a management position opened up and he came to me and said, Estee, I don't think you'd be interested in this, but I just want to let you know that there's this management job that's opening up. I don't know if you want to be bothered with it, but I would love to see you take it. But I understand if you don't want to be bothered by all that. And I remember being blown away thinking, what vibes am I giving off?
Yeah.
And that he's thinking that I might not be interested in moving up the ladder.
And to be not be, it's interesting word, not be bothered. I think I'm going to be bothered by this promotion opportunity.
Right. So needless to say, I did take that opportunity. But also my one of my first really big lessons was that I was always going to be very transparent about wanting more and being ready for more.
I love that. Say it. Say it out. There's something about saying it out loud. Just not so much so tell the universe, but just letting it be known, right? I'm not trying to jump at the moment, but just so you know, I'm open.
That's right.
Keep your ears open. Listen. I always have my listening tour, right? It's curious you say your best boss. Are there things that stand out to you that you took away for yourself in the way that you lead?
He was a good person and he was very transparent with his people. He cared about his people. And I liked how he operated. He was calm yet decisive, was able to make decisions, provide the explanations why. Totally. And he's someone who could give bad news, but you still know that he tried his best and he was doing it for the right reasons.
Absolutely. I feel like even if things are difficult, if you can explain why, there's something to that. And when we were chatting in prep, you mentioned to me some of the difficult decisions that you have to make today. Seems like that might have been an influence on some of what you're doing there.
Yeah. Actually, it was. Yeah.
We'll jump to what you're doing present day, of course. But so from that manager role, were you managing a good number of people? What was the scope of the direct reports at that point?
Myself and my partner were both managing teams of relationship managers.
Okay.
So we each had a couple of plans each. So it was player coach.
Okay.
But it was definitely more coach.
Yeah.
And it was the first time you grow up in the industry, in any industry usually, and you're one of many. So you have people to bounce ideas off of, people that are in the exact same position you're in. And this was the first time, and I still had a partner, so I still had someone to bounce ideas off of, but it's the first time I was not one of many. Totally. And it was first time, and it just went from there.
Yeah.
But that's a little bit of a shock when you don't have your team. Well, so
leadership can be isolating. Right?
It really is. It's what you want, or generally what you want, but it cuts both ways. You can lose a lot of that. It is a lonely path.
Yeah. But it's interesting because, again, around the decision-making stuff you were talking about, I think I reflected on that after you told me that on some of the things that I'm doing and some of the decisions that you have to make. And there's fewer people to talk to about those decisions. And so I almost feel like this, to go back on your mentorship piece, like this peer-to-peer mentoring that we do becomes that much more critical. People who are at a similar stage or similar role, you can bounce ideas off of there because it's less so within your own org, right? It's so interesting the way that it evolves. So to your point, it's what you wanted. It's what you said you wanted. But there's sort of these realities in the shift and how things change. you are in this management role. What was that next? You put it out there, you're always looking for more. What was that next more for you? What was the next jump?
At that, so Principal had acquired the retirement plan business of ABN AMRO.
Okay.
I did not want to move to Des Moines.
Yep.
So I had my kids and my husband at the time in Chicago. So I knew I wanted to stay in the Chicago area. So I ended up, after that acquisition, taking some time off. It was a summer. I took an entire summer off. And I don't know if you were a Seinfeld fan.
Yes.
But in Seinfeld,
I
it was the
judge
summer of
people.
George.
Yes, I will judge. If you don't catch my Seinfeld reference, I will judge. So yes,
Me too.
absolutely. The summer of Estee.
I had the summer of Estee.
I love that. So,
Yeah, I did. That's what we called it in my house, the summer of Estee.
How old
And
was
then it was time to
were the
start.
kids young? Were they young?
The kids were young.
That's
Yeah, the kids
awesome.
were probably definitely grammar school age.
Okay.
So probably younger grammar school.
Oh, that's a special
And
summer then.
it was a great summer, and we traveled,
Yeah.
and it was time incredibly well spent. The only time I had ever done that in my career. So it
Oh,
was
absolutely. I feel like after garden leave that some people get when they switch
Absolutely.
firms, which my garden leave was actually over part of the summer, which was lovely. But yeah, you don't really get those opportunities to do
No.
that, especially when
No.
kids are young.
Exactly.
That's fantastic. Did you feel recharged?
I did. And just me being me, there was always this kind of hanging over my head. At some point, you really need to put your feelers out there. You
Yeah.
really need to start looking.
Yeah.
And that just kept building until after our last trip, I was like, okay, I'm going to buckle down now. Now I'm not going to be able to enjoy the summer of Estee unless I
Right.
know I have to.
That's so me. Yeah. You have to make sure something's there waiting.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what was waiting? What was waiting for you?
Mornings. So that's when Morningstar happened.
The ultimate Chicago firm. In our
Truly.
business anyway,
And
right?
it is a place. And however, the job I got, it was the head of operations
Oh, that's interesting.
for Morningstar's TAM. And I got the role because I had enough experience with investments and client service and turning things around. But I knew, I won't get into all the details, but there was a connection there that knew me in a previous life and really highly recommended me.
Okay.
And however, and I tell this to some people, I remember Googling on one of my first days of work, TAMP. What is it? I was completely unprepared for just what we were running at the time.
That's
But it's the best way to learn. I knew enough of the business to be able to piece it together.
Yeah.
And of course, people and management. And it ended up being one of the best places to grow Morningstar. And it actually is the company that I spent almost 10 years there.
Yeah.
So I spent the bulk of my career, or Morningstar was the longest tenure I've had.
Yeah, absolutely. What if I think back at your different pivots to that point, were there certain things that you asked yourself you were looking for? Because culture, karma, people, there's all these different components that go into these decisions. What was it that drove you to make some of the decisions that you did to take these pivots because new organizations aren't always easy, right? And it takes a lot of courage, a lot of commitment to make that change and reestablish yourself in a new organization.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't know that I can pinpoint it down to one thing.
Yeah.
I get bored easily.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really do the challenge, and I like to fix things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so and I'm always looking for more. And I guess ultimately, Jillian, and you probably feel this too, at some level, you have confidence that you can make things better.
Yeah, totally.
And so if there's an opportunity to make things better, it's almost like a vacuum. I have to fill it.
Yeah. Go in there. Yeah, absolutely. So at Morningstar, because I think of you as relationship management, right? In the roles that you've had, was there, because the head of ops is certainly not that, right? How did your roles evolve at Morningstar before the next pivot?
First of all, I think everything is relationship management.
100%. Totally true. Totally true. No matter what.
No matter what role you're in.
Yes.
If you care, you're engaged in some form of relationship.
It's just relationships with your peers at your own organization. A huge part of what you do. If you want to be successful anyway, in my opinion.
Correct.
Yeah.
But that said, so yeah, I started off as the head of ops. And then, however, we were a TAMP and we interfaced with all of these large broker dealers, but we had no one that was actually dedicated to interfacing with these large broker dealers.
Oh.
So we had a change in the division manager, the actual head of the TAMP. And Kunal Kapoor, who's now the CEO of Morningstar, was tapped to actually run that division. And I reported to Kunal, and he was ready to make a whole bunch of changes.
Yeah.
And I said, look, I have someone that I've been grooming that could very easily step into my role. We don't have a head of relationship management. We need that. I should do that. And that's how that pivot occurred. There was a need. I thought I was the person to get that business or get that department ramped up.
Yeah.
And that's what I did.
That's awesome. Where do you think that confidence comes from? Not everybody would do that, right? Not everybody would say, I see this gap. I'm the person. And oh, by the way, I've got this person I've been taking care of here behind me. That's a lot of confidence to say to someone. Where do you think that came from?
Perhaps I go back to the Navy Reserve. If you could have seen me in high school, Jillian, you would really know what I'm talking about.
Oh my gosh.
But I do really think I get a lot of the confidence that I have from that experience.
Yeah.
And then I am confident in my abilities. I really do think I can. And sometimes I fail.
Right.
Sometimes I make mistakes. That's because I'm human. We're all human. We're going to make mistakes. But I think more often than not, I am able to contribute more than detract.
Absolutely. And not being afraid to fail and looking at failure as actually an opportunity to just learn.
Correct.
Right? I think can help people be willing to take the, call it risk, right?
Yeah.
They've considered that.
Because really almost you could say that not doing anything is risk as well.
True.
So you pick your poison, right?
Oh, it's very
You pick
true.
your hard.
You pick your hard. And would you rather be the hard that gets you potentially into this new exciting opportunity, or just keep sitting there and be comfortable?
Correct.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the next step that you made, and I think the first time we met was when you were at Envestnet, which was another sort of massive Chicago presence. Not anymore, although they did reopen, I hear, in the city. Yeah.
Oh, good.
So I'm curious what was it that drove that decision? Were you recruited away from Morningstar in that case?
So that was
a
an
long time. Like you said, Morningstar was like a long,
almost 10 years. Yeah. And it was an example of being ready for more.
Yeah.
And Morningstar
did you know people?
I did because Morningstar did interact with Envestnet.
Absolutely.
So I did know the folks at Envestnet, Lori Hardwick at the time in particular.
Now that you knew what a TAMP was, right?
I was completely qualified.
You were qualified to go to Envestnet. That's right. Yeah. And there was a lot of back and forth between those two organizations.
That's right.
I don't know if you kicked it off but there was a lot of back and forth.
There was, and still is. In the industry, everyone is either a partner, a vendor, a client, or some combination of those three. So
absolutely.
It was very much and still is like that between Morningstar and Envestnet.
But sorry, I interrupted you. So go.
No, yeah.
So you got there.
So Yeah, I was ready for more, and it wasn't. Morningstar was very flat, especially the division that I was in. And Investment was hiring in a role that I thought I could add value in. And yeah, I moved over there, and coming to InvestNet from, at the time, a partner. The Morningstar, the area that I was in Morningstar was very much a partner of investments. So I knew the business from the partner end of things. And that was very helpful in my role at InvestNet. Yeah.
How did you find yourself coming across these opportunities outside of your organization as you went through? I'm wondering about your network. And I like to think about the network as a living, breathing thing that you have to nurture and honor and keep up on. Was it that for you? Like, how did you stay so connected on the different opportunities that were coming about for you?
It's a good question. So I guess there's probably a couple of different ways to answer that. So my roles have always been very externally focused.
Okay.
So I knew folks in the industry. I was at conferences. I would man a booth often. I was just very integrated into the industry. So I did and obviously do know a fair amount of people, and you're spot on. Your network is truly so important. And broadening your network is essential, right? Not having a fixed thing, because it is living and breathing, as you said. So it will expand naturally, and it should expand naturally. So when I would hear of a role or see a role, usually there was someone I could call, and I'm sure you're familiar with this.
Yeah.
To find out more about it, or certainly at least a second degree connection
Exactly.
to the role somehow.
But I would imagine that network grew dramatically given your role at InvestNet. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about what it was you were doing there, because talk about the ultimate in connectivity and kind of what you and your team were doing as it relates to the broader industry and frankly, the power seat InvestNet sat in, and I think still does.
Truly. Yeah, InvestNet did and still does really occupy such a central role in the financial services space, right? With all of these broker dealers using various parts of the platform, all of these RIAs using various parts of the platform, asset managers distributing through the platform, fintech firms integrating with the platform. So sitting there, you have such a bird's eye view of the industry. And you could go as macro or as micro as you'd like to look.
Yeah.
And you just learn so much and trends, and you meet people. And it was an amazing 5 years. It was an amazing place to learn and grow.
Yeah. And the timing, I think about it, about reflecting back on myself as you talk, like when I joined the ETF industry in 2008, like to think about just this trajectory, the growth at that moment, right? In the growth. And think about the time that you were at InvestNet, it's when TAMPs became much bigger, right? InvestNet was growing by leaps and bounds. Model portfolios were taking hold, this idea of the strategist. The time that you were there was so much meaningful, impactful change that has lasted and just gotten bigger throughout the industry. And now if you're not on InvestNet now, you're no one, right? Everybody has to be there in some capacity. And it's just so interesting to think about the timing of which you were there and all the trends that took place that have held true since then and all you got to see.
It's true. Outsourcing, making advisors more efficient in running their business.
Absolutely.
Yet all of those asset managers learning how to distribute through.
Let's not forget distribution.
Yeah, right?
Exactly.
So much. It was a time of such fast, a real explosion in the way the industry was growing and pivoting.
Yes.
And when you think about wealth management, the classic way to think of wealth management is the wirehouse,
Sure.
the old school mentality, and that is still very vibrant and valid. But I think a company like Envestnet really was able to empower the independent broker dealers and the independent RIAs to become so much more consequential and have scale and leverage that they otherwise wouldn't have had.
Absolutely. How did you approach, because you faced off with so many different asset managers. Just is there anything that a thread that you pulled through? I think about relationship management from your earliest days. Were there certain threads that you pulled through in the way that you worked with your clients? Because I understand relationship management is part of what we all do, but I think you did so much of it throughout your entire career. Was it something that really held true to you that you still think of today that was really effective?
I think what Envestnet and the role that Envestnet really did was crystallize one really important facet of relationship management, in that we have to both be winning.
Yeah.
I can't win at your expense,
Yep.
and you can't win at my expense.
Yeah.
So finding that sweet spot for all the asset managers that were looking to Envestnet to help them distribute meaningfully.
Everybody.
We had to, and I had an amazing team that I was able to build at Envestnet. It was one of the most fun things I've done, was really put together a great team. And again, Envestnet was great on really giving me almost carte blanche in creating the value prop for not just the asset managers, but for the broker dealers, and constructing the right economics that would make everyone win. And I think everyone did win.
I think so. I honestly, like, as an outsider insider who was involved in both sides, I think that it turned into quite an elegant model. Of course, there were always those wanting more, trying to figure out how they could get more help, because everybody was trying to crack that nut. And how do you effectively distribute within such a growing, massive infrastructure? And I think before we pivot to your current role and how you got there and how you're thinking about the role as CEO, right? You, as not nearly enough women do, you cracked the C-suite, right? And so I do want to spend a bit of time there. But you talked a bit about building a team. And I think building a team is so interesting, and there's so many dynamics that come with it. What are some of the things that you thought about as you thought about bringing different individuals onto the team? Were there certain criteria you were looking for and that you still to this day think about as you're bringing people onto your team?
That's a great question. I think this is going to sound so corny, but I think nice people.
Yeah. I don't think it's corny at all.
Just, I think you can teach a lot. I am proof that you can teach
Absolutely
almost any technical skill, right?
Yep.
But you really can't teach just, if you're not a decent, nice person, we're not going to teach that to you.
Absolutely.
You have to be a decent, nice person who is able to be motivated and able to be a good teammate and play nicely with others. And that's the environment I want to play in. And so I want to make sure we have people that are able to give off that similar vibe.
Totally. And what's funny, you may not even realize you said this, but when I asked you about that first boss, is it Terry?
Yeah.
The first thing you said was he was a good person.
Okay. There you go.
So there you go.
Good
person, nice people. You can't teach nice, you can't teach motivate. Like those are things that sort of are within you. So I completely agree. There are things you can teach and there are things you can't. I love that. So maybe bring us up to speed today. You had the opportunity to become CEO, right? That is a not inconsequential opportunity, right? To take on that role. And as part of Women in ETFs, we talk so much about this cracking into the C-suite. And so I'm quite curious how you thought about approaching this role when it was brought to you, right? And what was your decision-making process? Because it was a move too, right? You had to relocate. Granted, your children were older, but that's still not an insignificant change in your life. How did it start and get moving? And what was your thought process onto taking it?
So I was approached by a headhunter. Primerica had hired a hunter. But going back to relationship management, Jillian, so my predecessor, the gentleman whose role I took, his name was Bill Kelly. I had known Bill Kelly for years. So when I was at Morningstar is a vendor of Primerica's. And I met Bill Kelly on one of our Morningstar trips down to Duluth, Georgia. And this is just strange how the universe works. But I was at a meeting. Bill Kelly was running the meeting from the Primerica side. And I remember leaving that meeting and saying to one of my Morningstar colleagues, one day I want to work for Bill Kelly. He was just such an amazing man. Still is, right? Even though he's retired now. But I liked him immediately. I thought he was just so thoughtful and professional. And I just I liked how he operated just in that one meeting. And I would attend other meetings with Bill and I would see him at conferences. And I always kept up to the network, right? Always kept up a collegial relationship with him. And when Primerica was looking for someone to lead the broker dealer, PFS Investments, my name came up and they tasked the recruiting firm to reach out to me. They did. And it was the right time in my career. My kids were older. I was divorced. I knew I didn't want to stay in Chicago, but I didn't quite know where I wanted to go. Yeah. By the way, in full disclosure, Atlanta was not on the list of places.
I do remember you telling me that. Like, it was not one of the.
It was just nowhere I had even thought of moving to. But I have to tell you, I love it. Love it. Unequivocally love it down here. Would never go back. Yeah. Sorry, my phone's ringing.
Oh, no.
But yeah, I love it. And I leapt at the opportunity. It was just, it's the job of a lifetime, to be quite honest.
Oh, that's fantastic. So what were you were approached about it. Were there people that you tapped to talk about it in your sort of your networking circle? Were there people that you wanted to talk to and get opinions about it before taking the role?
There were. I'm blessed to have some amazing friends.
Yeah.
And it was funny, and I won't name names, but we were a group of us women in the industry were together. And one of the women was up for a CEO role at her company. Wow. And I was up for this role, and we both got the roles around the same time. But we went through we disclosed together, and it was, so I would say, even though I bounced ideas off of them and thoughts off of them, I will tell you that there was no question in my mind that this was the role I wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting you just said what you said about your friend, because I was talking earlier about peer-to-peer mentorship. I had a very similar situation where I got my role to run the distribution business at JP Morgan. At the same time, my friend got a similar role at a different organization. And it is incredible how impactful those relationships can be. You both take the same leap, and then to have that maintain itself when you're in those roles, like we said, it can be very lonely when you're the leader. So to have that connectivity for someone in a very similar role, I found it to be incredibly impactful. And it sounds like you did as well, as someone who they can't make the ultimate decision for you, but to have someone to talk through it with, and someone who's going through some more similar challenges potentially.
That's right. And even negotiating, even tactical decisions like negotiating, it's really helpful to have folks that you could lean on a bit.
Yeah. Sheila used to have breakfast at Cafe Centro all the time in New York City, Grand Central.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. Chicago to New York. I was coming into New York. And it was the same things. Like, how are you handling InvestNet, for example? They're asking me for this. It's just incredible to just be able to have that connection. But speaking of challenges, I wanted to hear your thoughts on, now that you're in that role, what are some of the things that you found surprising, challenging, that maybe you weren't prepared for, and how have you addressed them?
I guess there are many challenges, which is part of the reason you want to do what you're doing.
Right.
I guess and we talked about this particular challenge earlier, Jillian. It's the decision making, and largely they're decisions around risk.
Yeah.
And how much risk are you willing to take for a given benefit? Or so that's really, and those are the things that keep you up at night. And then also, this is the first time in my career I've been on this side of the table, right?
Sure.
I've always been selling into broker dealers, and now running one. My constituency now has become my field.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah.
The reps and the advisors in the field, which is a huge responsibility. And so that's been a change for me. I thought I knew advisors. I thought I knew reps, but being on this side of the table, things in a very different light, your priorities shift.
Yeah. Your internal stakeholders
Correct.
are suddenly driving so much of what you're trying to figure out. It's so funny. The one thing that I really didn't know about you was the reserves, right? And it's funny that it's the confidence that you got from that one thing I didn't know about you. It's sort of this thing that has gone through everything we've talked about, and the confidence to pick your head up and look for a new role, go to new firms, make the hard decisions. It's so interesting to watch your journey. And I'm so grateful that you took the time to spend with me today to talk about it. I always love to end, because I love to read, although with a 2-year-old, I don't have a ton of time to read. I do more podcast listening. But is there a particular book that you're reading right now, or even podcast that you're listening to, that you think our audience would love to hear about?
So here's the part in this podcast, Jillian, where I'm doing some internal calculations, depending. I'm trying to decide how honest I should be. And I'm going to be completely honest.
Please.
And tell you that I am not listening to any business podcast, or I'm not reading any business book.
Yes.
What I am very much into right now is growth, and particularly spiritual growth.
Yep.
So I've been listening to podcasts about your attitude and your mindset, and being a little more centered in the way I think and the way I react or respond, right, to things. And that's the personal path I'm on. And that's that. So therefore, those are the podcasts I'm listening to.
I absolutely adore that, because I find myself in a very similar stage. I don't listen to business podcasts. To be fair, I listen to 2 ETF podcasts. They're hosted by friends. I like them. But I'm actually I'm like a Glennon Doyle armchair expert, like 24/7, just like all up in it myself right now, trying to do the same. And I do think if it makes you more centered as a person, it makes you better as a business leader. So I do think there's this inextricable link.
There is. You know, what they used to say is a happy mom is a good mom.
Yes.
So I think that happy person is a good person. I think you have to put on your mask before helping others. So we need self-care. We need to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of other people.
And it takes so many different forms. I don't think we did not talk about this in advance, but I am precisely on that path with you, reading and listening to Glennon Doyle and others in that same vein.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. I thank you so very much for the opportunity to have this conversation. I know everyone at Flex is going to be excited that we were able to reconnect, and many of my colleagues, and certainly appreciate, I know our listeners enjoy learning and take a lot away from your journey. I know will probably see themselves in a lot of what you talked about today. So thank you again. For those who, go ahead, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you.
I was going to say, you are very good at this, by the way.
Thank you.
You are very good at this.
I really enjoy it. It's a huge perk of what I get to do. To get to talk to folks like yourself, this is not a bad part of what I get to do day to day. But for those listening, please, you can take a listen to this podcast, InFLXtion Points, through any of the places you get your podcasts, including Flex Network's YouTube channel, where if you want to see Essie and I having a conversation, you can see us, or just listen through Google, Spotify, or Apple. Become a member of Flex Networks at flexnetworks.com. to catch this episode there, as well as any of our Inflection Points episodes. So with that, we'll say goodbye until next time. Thank you all.
The information contained in this recording is provided as is for educational and informational purposes only and should not serve as the basis for any trading or investing decisions. Flex Networks makes no representations and disclaims all express, implied, and statutory warranties of any kind to any viewer, listener, or other third party. Neither Flex Networks nor any of its affiliates make any endorsement of any particular company, security, product, or financial strategy, and nothing contained in this recording should be construed as investment advice. Investors should undertake their own due diligence and carefully evaluate companies before investing.